My name is Warren Huffman. I'm 50 years old and I've been working at the Ainsworth City Archives for almost 25 years. A quarter of a century among yellowed papers, old photographs, and documents that preserve the stories of people who are no longer alive. Many people think my job is boring, but for me, every file is a life, every document a memory. In this town, not many people notice me. I am just a quiet man who every morning walks the 6 blocks from his house to the municipal building where the archives are located. In the evenings, I work part-time translating from Spanish, documents for the local clinic, sometimes contracts for the law firm of Montgomery and Sons. This generates extra money. Money that for the past 3 years has gone to pay for my son Elliot's tuition at Ramsey College, our state's most prestigious institution. This morning, while going through the mail, I found an envelope with the college logo on it, a receipt for next semester's tuition, an amount that made me sigh heavily. I put the envelope aside and put a Miles Davis record on the turntable. The morning ritual, a cup of black coffee without sugar, jazz, and 15 minutes of silence before starting the day. Collecting vinyl records is my only passion. I started collecting them as a teenager and continued even when everyone switched to cassettes, then CDs, and now digital music. I have an entire wall in my living room stacked with records, over 1,000 copies. Margaret always teased me about this hobby of mine, but lovingly. "You and your antiquities," she would say, shaking her head and smiling. Margaret. It had been 11 years since cancer had taken her from us. Elliot was only 9 then. I still remember his confused eyes at the funeral, the small palm in my hand, and how he asked, "Daddy, can Mommy see us now?" I didn't know what to answer. I didn't know how to be a single father at all to a boy who looked so much like his mother, the same expressive brown eyes, the same stubborn chin, and the same passion for music. Margaret was a musician, playing cello in the town orchestra. Elliot inherited her talent, but chose the electric guitar. At 14, he was already playing better than many adults. By 16, he'd started his own band at school. And now, at 20, he's one of the top musicians in the student ensemble at Ramsey College and seems to dream of more. I took a sip of coffee and looked at Elliot's picture on the bookshelf. High school graduation, 3 years ago. A tall, handsome young man in a robe and square cap, smiling broadly. Next to him, I look quite unassuming, medium height, with bald spots and thin-rimmed glasses. People are often surprised to learn that we're father and son. I gave everything I had to get Elliot into Ramsey College. When he received his acceptance letter, we both cried tears of joy. Margaret would have been so proud. But the tuition, it was higher than I'd anticipated. A lot higher. I sold our car and started walking. Gave up my annual trip to see my brother in Portland. Stopped buying new clothes. I sold off part of my record collection that I'd been collecting for years, and took an extra job doing translations. None of that mattered. What mattered was that Elliot would get the education Margaret and I had dreamed of. He would be the first in our family to get a college education. He would accomplish more than I ever could. And now, 2.5 years later, I sighed and set the cup aside. Our relationship with Elliot changed when he went to college. No, to be honest with myself, it started to change even earlier in high school. My son is a bright star and I'm just a lowly archivist, not the kind of father you brag about to your rich friends. And then Veronica showed up. A beautiful, well-groomed girl from a wealthy family in some town in Connecticut. They met freshman year of high school. She studies art history, wears designer clothes, and seems to consider anyone who makes less than 6 figures a year unworthy of attention, including me. Last spring, when Elliot turned 19, he announced that he and Veronica were getting married. I was shocked they'd known each other less than a year. But they insisted. The wedding was modest, in a city park. Veronica's parents didn't come. I didn't know if they were against the marriage or if they just didn't want to waste time traveling to a small town like Ainsworth. After the ceremony, the young people left for the weekend, and I returned to an empty house and allowed myself to drink whiskey for the first time in a long time. I saw my son only a few times since then. He rarely called. Each time the conversation was short, awkward. Most often they were requests for money, either for new books or for tools or for rent. I never said no. The phone in the kitchen rang, interrupting my musings. I stood up, pushed back my chair, and picked up the phone. "Dad? It's me." Elliot's voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Good morning, son." I smiled involuntarily. "How are you doing?" "Fine. Listen, Veronica and I got a new house. It's not huge, but it's in a nice neighborhood. We have a guest bedroom and everything." "Congratulations." I tried to hide my surprise. A house in a nice neighborhood in Ainsworth was expensive. "That's great." "Yeah, and we were thinking. Anyway, the day after tomorrow is Thanksgiving. Why don't you come over for dinner? Veronica's cooking the turkey." I froze with the pipe in my hand. Elliot had never asked me out in the last 2 years. "Sure, I'd love to," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Great. I'll see you tomorrow then." He hung up before I could say anything else. It was the first time in a long time that Elliot hadn't called me himself to ask for money. Maybe he was finally growing up. Maybe family life had changed him. I looked at the tuition receipt. The amount was impressive, but I could handle it. For the past 3 months, I'd taken even more transfers, working late into the night. I slept no more than 5 hours a night now, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that Elliot would get his degree. There was a knock on the door. Gloria Ramirez, my colleague from the archives and perhaps the only person in this town I could call a friend, stood at the door. "Good morning, Warren," she smiled, handing me a paper bag. "I brought scones from that new bakery on Maple Street. Figured we'd need reinforcements. We have to sort out the Phelps Foundation today." Gloria was a 45-year-old Hispanic woman, energetic and straightforward. She had worked at the archives for the past 10 years and knew about my situation with Elliot. "Thank you." I took the package. "You want coffee?" "Sure. Your specialty, strong enough to hold a spoon." She went into the kitchen and sat down at the table. Gloria looked at me with concern. "Warren, you look tired. These overnight transfers are wearing you down." "Only 1 year left," I shrugged. "Elliot will get his degree, get a good job, and everything will be fine." "What about your relationship with him?" she asked, sipping her coffee. "Had you seen each other lately?" "Actually," I couldn't hold back a smile, "he invited me to Thanksgiving, to their new house." Gloria looked surprised. "She did? That's, unexpected. And good. All day I've been going through old papers of the Phelps family, one of the founders of Ainsworth. Photos, letters, business records. The history of an entire dynasty was passing through my hands. I've always loved that feeling of touching the past, of being the keeper of other people's stories. Thanksgiving was cold and clear. I woke up early before dawn and stood under the shower for a long time, trying to wash away the fatigue of the last few days. The blue suit hanging on the closet door looked a little wrinkled, so I steamed it carefully with the iron. White shirt, dark blue tie in a small pattern, a gift from Margaret for our last anniversary. I rarely wore that tie, saving it for special occasions, and today was certainly a special occasion. By 3 o'clock, I hailed a cab. Usually I walked or took the bus, but today I didn't want to take any chances. The snow that had fallen the day before had already begun to melt, turning into slush. And the neighborhood where Elliot and Veronica had rented the house was in the northern part of the city where buses rarely went. The cabbie turned on the radio, and a modern song filled the cabin. I stared out the window, watching the neighborhoods change. The city center with its municipal buildings, stores, and restaurants. Then the middle-class residential neighborhoods, where neat houses with small lawns stood. And finally, The Highlands, the neighborhood on the hill where the wealthiest Ainsworth residents lived. Large mansions, manicured gardens, expensive cars by the porch. The cab stopped in front of a two-story colonial-style house with white columns and large windows. A brand-new silver SUV stood in the driveway. "Here we are," the cabbie announced. $32. I paid, adding a tip, and got out of the car. I was holding a small bag with a bottle of wine, not the most expensive, but decent, and a box of chocolates for Veronica. I nervously pulled on my jacket and walked to the door. The bell rang through the house with a melodic chime. A few seconds later, the door opened and Elliot appeared on the doorstep. My son looked beautiful, tall, slender, wearing a light gray high-collar sweater and dark jeans. His brown hair was styled with a careless elegance I could never have achieved. "Hi, Dad," he smiled, but somehow strained. "Come in." "Hello, son." I handed him the package. "Happy Thanksgiving." He took the package, looked inside, and nodded. "Thank you. Come on in. Get undressed." I took off my coat and hung it on the coat rack by the door. The house was as impressive inside as it was outside. A spacious hallway with a marble floor, a graceful staircase to the second floor, expensive furniture, paintings on the walls. Everything looked like it had been taken from an interior design magazine. "Nice place," I said, trying to sound pleased rather than surprised. "Yeah, we got lucky with the lease." Elliot led me into the living room. Veronica's parents helped with the down payment, so that's where the money came from, I thought. Veronica's parents, of course. They must be very wealthy people. In the living room, Veronica was sitting on the couch. She looked like a photo model, long blonde hair, flawless makeup, a cream dress that perfectly emphasized her slim figure. At my appearance, she stood up and smiled strainedly. "Hello, Mr. Huffman." Her voice was melodic but cold. "Veronica, please call me Warren." I handed her a box of chocolates. "Happy holidays." "Thank you." She took the box with 2 fingers like it was something unpleasant. "Elliot, put this somewhere else, please." My son took the box from her and disappeared into the kitchen. Veronica and I were left alone, and there was an awkward silence for a few seconds. "It's a beautiful house," I finally said. "Yeah, it's pretty nice for Ainsworth," she shrugged. "It's not what I was used to back home, but it'll do for a while." I nodded, not knowing what to say. Luckily, Elliot came back with 2 glasses in his hands. "Wine, Dad? Or would you prefer beer?" "Wine would be great, thanks." He handed me a glass and sat down next to Veronica on the couch. I sank into the chair across from him. "How's college going?" I asked. "How are your music classes going?" "It's great," Elliot sipped from his glass. "Our band won the intercollegiate competition last month. We were even invited to perform at the New Year's Eve ball." "That's great. Congratulations," I smiled sincerely. "I always said you had talent, just like your mom." Elliot's face tensed slightly at the mention of Margaret. Veronica threw a quick glance at him. "Elliot is too modest," she said. "He was invited to 3 different groups after the competition. Professor Jenkins says he could have a great future in music." "I don't doubt it," I nodded. Margaret was predicted to have a brilliant career too, but she chose family. "Different times, different priorities." Veronica shrugged elegantly. "Nowadays, women don't sacrifice their careers for everything else." There was something like condemnation in her voice, but I chose to ignore it. "How are your studies going, Veronica? You're studying art history, right?" "Art history and contemporary art practices," she corrected me. "I'm getting straight A's. Professor Lambert thinks I could intern at the Metropolitan Museum of Art next summer." "It's very prestigious," I nodded respectfully. "Of course it's prestigious," she grinned. "Only the best people go there." Elliot stood up suddenly. "I'm going to go check on the turkey." "Veronica made a terrific dinner, Dad. You're going to love it." He disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with Veronica. She pulled out her phone and started looking at something, completely ignoring my presence. I looked around. There were modern abstract paintings on the walls and some fancy figurines on the shelves. "The turkey's ready," Elliot announced, appearing in the doorway. "Come into the dining room." The dining room was as spotless as the rest of the house. We sat down at the table. Elliot cut up the turkey and placed the meat on plates. I raised my glass. To family. To being together this Thanksgiving. Elliot and Veronica exchanged quick glances before raising their glasses. We drank and I proceeded to eat. The turkey was indeed delicious, as was the rest of the meal. "Very tasty," I said after a few bites. "Thanks for the invitation." "You're welcome," Elliot said, not looking at me. "We thought it was about time we invited you." Something in his tone made me wary, as if this wasn't a sincere wish, but some kind of obligation that had finally come to fruition. "How are things going at work, Mr. Huffman?" Veronica asked, pouring herself some cranberry sauce. "Elliot said you were working in some kind of archive?" "The Ainsworth City Archives," I nodded. "We're working on digitizing old documents. It's an interesting project." "Digitizing?" Veronica raised her eyebrows. "Wow, your archive has finally made it to the 21st century." Elliot snorted, trying to hide a chuckle. "Dad, you were always so resistant to new technology. I remember when you refused to buy a computer until I needed to write school papers." "I wasn't resistant." I shook my head. "I just didn't see the need. But times change." "Some people change with them and some people get stuck in the past," Veronica observed. "My father always says you have to keep up with the times or you'll fall by the wayside." "Your father is a wise man," I said, trying to sound friendly. "What does he do?" "He's the managing partner of an investment firm in Greenwich," she said with undisguised pride. "He has hundreds of millions of dollars in assets under management." "Impressive," I nodded. "And your mom?" "My mom is involved in philanthropy. She's on the board of directors of 3 nonprofit organizations." Veronica sipped her wine. "And your wife? She's dead, right?" Elliot told me. "Yeah, Margaret died 11 years ago." I nodded demurely. "Cancer." "That's too bad," Veronica said without much sympathy in her voice. "And you never remarried?" "No," I shook my head. "It didn't work out." "Dad's just too busy with his records and old papers," Elliot interjected with a slight sneer in his voice. "He doesn't have time to date." "I just haven't met the right person," I replied calmly. "That suit," Veronica said suddenly, looking at me appraisingly. "It looks vintage." "I wore it at your wedding," I said. "Yes, I remember," she nodded. "And I think it was old-fashioned even then." Elliot snorted again, but this time he didn't even try to hide it. "Dad, you know there are clothing stores, right, where they sell things made in this decade?" I felt myself blushing. "This suit is pretty decent and it looks like your grandfather wore it," Elliot finished for me. "Seriously, Dad, you're 50, not 80. You could dress a little more modern." "At least for your son's sake," Veronica added. "You know, when Elliot showed me your pictures, I thought it was his grandfather at first. They both laughed, like it was the funniest joke ever." I sat there not knowing what to say, feeling the awkwardness building up inside me. "Speaking of old-fashioned," Elliot continued, turning to Veronica, "did I tell you that Dad still listens to vinyl records? He's got a whole collection of that antiquity." "Really?" Veronica rounded her eyes in feigned surprise. "Like in a museum?" "Worse," Elliot laughed. "In museums, at least the exhibits are behind glass. He's actually listening to them, on a turntable that's probably older than I am." "Vinyl records are back in vogue," I remarked. "A lot of people appreciate them for their warmer, more authentic sound." "Oh yes," Veronica said. "Hipsters and old people are the biggest fans of vinyl." Elliot almost choked on his wine with laughter. "God, Dad, you got it right. You could be a hipster." They laughed again, and I felt something inside me clench. It wasn't friendly humor. It wasn't harmless banter. They were openly mocking me. "If you don't like the way I dress or my hobbies," I said calmly, "you could have just said so instead of turning it into a joke." "Come on, Dad," Elliot rolled his eyes. "We're just joking around. Don't be so sensitive." "Modern parents understand humor," Veronica added. "My father always laughs when we make fun of his habit of reading the newspaper in the morning." "I understand humor," I said, "but there's a difference between a joke and mockery." "Oh God, here it comes," Elliot sighed theatrically. "Dad's about to give us a lecture on manners and respect. He loves to teach, Veronica. When I was a teenager, he could talk for hours about the importance of being polite and respecting your elders." "Like that's bad advice," I said. "It's outdated advice," Veronica retorted. "Nobody talks about blind respect for elders nowadays. Respect has to be earned." "And why haven't I earned it?" I asked, feeling myself getting annoyed. "Well, like being stuck in the last century," Elliot shrugged. "Seriously, Dad, you're like something out of an old movie, an archivist who listens to records, wears tweed jackets, and talks about manners. Do you know how hard it is to explain to my friends what my dad does?" "What's difficult about it?" I asked. "Because no one knows what an archivist is," Elliot exclaimed. "When I say my father works in an archive, everyone thinks you're some kind of librarian or museum curator." "Preserving historical documents is an important job," I said, trying to stay calm. "Important?" Veronica snorted. "Maybe in the 19th century. Nowadays, all documents are digital. Why do we need those dusty pieces of paper anyway?" "Because they're part of our history," I started to get angry. "Without the past, there's no future. These documents tell us about the people who lived before us, about how this city was built, how—" "God, Veronica, I told you," Elliot interrupted me, turning to his wife. "He can talk about this stuff for hours, like anyone would care." "Elliot," I looked him in the eye, "I realize you may find my work boring, but that's no reason to make fun of it." "It's not that it's boring, Dad," Elliot shook his head. "It's that she's useless and underpaid. Do you know how much Veronica's father makes in a month? More than you make in a year." "Money isn't the only measure of success," I said. "Tell that to students who can't afford to pay for college," Elliot retorted. "Or people who can't afford decent clothes." That was a low blow. I swallowed, trying to hold in my resentment. "I've always made sure you had everything you needed." "Necessities?" Elliot laughed. "Dad, I went to school in cheap supermarket clothes. I didn't have a decent computer. My first cell phone was an ancient model that everyone laughed at." "I did the best I could." My voice sounded strained. "What you could, yes," Elliot agreed. "But it wasn't enough. If it hadn't been for the scholarship and the part-time jobs, I never would have gotten into Ramsey College." I felt something inside me snap. A part-time job? Scholarship? What is he talking about? I paid full price for his tuition. There were no scholarships. "Elliot, what scholarship are you talking about?" I asked slowly. He froze for a moment, then glanced quickly at Veronica. "The one I got last year. I told you." "No, you didn't tell me anything," I shook my head. "And there's no mention of a scholarship on the receipts I get." "Do you check my receipts?" Elliot's tone changed dramatically. "Really, Dad? Are you following me?" "I'm not." I tried to keep my voice calm. Elliot pounded his fist on the table. "You control everything. You always want to know everything I do." "I just want to know what's going on with my son." I clenched my fists under the table. "See, Veronica?" Elliot turned to his wife. "That's why I can't communicate with my father properly. He's always controlling everything, always trying to make me feel guilty." "I understand, honey." Veronica stroked his arm. "Some parents just can't let go of their children. They're stuck in that time when their kids were little and totally dependent on them. They talked about me like I wasn't even there, like I was some abstract concept rather than a living person sitting at their table." "I'm trying to be a good father," I said quietly. "I've always wanted the best for you, Elliot." "The best?" He grinned bitterly. You wanted me to be just like you, just as quiet, inconspicuous, content with little. You know what the funny thing is? You don't even realize how pathetic you are. I froze, stunned by those words. Pathetic? Is that really what my son thinks of me? I slowly put my fork and knife on my plate, carefully blotted my lips with my napkin, and stood up. Thank you for dinner, I said quietly. The turkey was delicious. Dad, where are you going? Elliot stopped laughing. We hadn't served dessert yet. I think I'll skip dessert. I headed for the dining room door. Come on, no offense, Elliot shouted after me. I went out into the hallway, took my coat off the rack and put it on. Elliot followed me out. Dad, seriously, you can't just leave, he sounded annoyed, not remorseful. It's Thanksgiving. It's a family holiday. Yeah, it's a family holiday. I looked him in the eye. But I don't seem to be a part of that family. Then go away. He suddenly got angry. It's even better. It'll be more fun without you. Maybe, I nodded. Goodbye, son. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The snow was almost melted, but the air was cold and piercing. I walked slowly down the steps and down the path to the street, feeling each step getting harder and harder. Not because of fatigue, but because of the weight of realizing what had happened. My son, my only child, the man I've lived for the past 11 years thinks I'm pathetic, laughs at me with his wife, lies to me about the money I earn by denying myself everything. I didn't get home until 9 o'clock at night. I walked for a long time, then got on a bus, drove a few stops and walked again. I needed time to get my thoughts in order, but they were jumbled, tumbling over each other, coming back to the same thing. Elliot's face contorted with contempt, Veronica's laughter, the words that cut my heart sharper than a knife. You don't even realize how pathetic you are. My own son, the only person I'd lived for in the last few years. At home, the first thing I did was take off my suit, the same one that had caused so much ridicule, and put on an old homemade sweater and pants. I brewed some strong tea, sat in a chair, and stared out the dark window. I got up, went to the bookshelf, and picked up a photo album. I flipped through it to the section with the pictures of little Elliot. Here he is, 3 years old, sitting on my shoulders on a trip to the zoo. Here's Margaret and I teaching him how to ride a bike. Here are school parties, birthday parties, family picnics. Where did I go wrong? When did my kind, inquisitive boy turn into this arrogant young man who is ashamed of his father? Maybe after Margaret's death. Maybe I was too soft on him, too indulgent in everything, trying to compensate for his mother's absence. Or was it something else? I remembered what Elliot had said about the scholarship and the part-time jobs. If he'd lied to me about that, what else could he be lying about? And more importantly, why? Was it just to get more money from me? The thought physically hurt. I'd always tried to give Elliot everything I could, even when it meant giving up my own needs. I'd saved money on everything: clothes, food, vacations, sold my car, sold off part of my record collection that I'd spent a lifetime collecting. I took on extra work, translated at night, didn't get enough sleep. Also, my son could go to a prestigious college so he could have a better future than me, and he thinks I'm pathetic. He makes fun of my job, my clothes, my hobbies, lies to me, using me. When that thought finally took full form, I felt something switch inside. Anger, resentment, frustration, all of it suddenly gave way to cold determination. I closed the photo album and returned it to the shelf. I couldn't sleep all night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking, remembering the last few years, analyzing my decisions, my mistakes. By morning, I felt exhausted, but strangely calm. I knew what I had to do. At 7 in the morning, I got up, showered, shaved more thoroughly than usual. I put on my work tweed jacket, the one Elliot and Veronica so disliked, and dark slacks. I brewed coffee and drank a cup, standing at the window looking out at the waking city. At 8 o'clock, I sat down at my desk, pulled out the receipt for next semester's fees I'd gotten the day before, and dialed the phone number listed on it. Ramsey College Finance Department. How may I help you? A woman's voice answered after the third ring. Good morning, I said calmly and businesslike. My name is Warren Huffman, and I pay tuition for my son, Elliot Huffman. I have a few questions about his bill. Of course, Mr. Huffman. Just a minute, I'll look up the information. I heard her tapping on the keyboard, then she spoke again. I have Elliot Huffman's account information. How can I help you? I would like to know if my son has any scholarship or financial aid from the college. Keys thumping again. No, Mr. Huffman. There is no information in our system about any scholarship or financial aid for Elliot Huffman. According to our records, tuition is paid entirely by you. I squeezed the receiver a little harder. I see. And one more question. The last payment I made at the beginning of this semester was received in full on the tuition account? Yes, the payment was received and credited in full. The current semester has been paid in full. Thank you. I would now like to cancel the payment for the next semester. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You would like to cancel payment for the spring semester? Yes, that's right. Mr. Huffman, I must warn you that if payment is not made by the end of December, your son will not be able to register for spring semester courses and may lose his place in college. I understand. My voice remained firm. However, I want to cancel the payment. Okay. The woman sounded a little confused. I'll make the appropriate notation in the system. You'll need to sign a waiver form. I can email it to you. Please send it. I dictated my email address. I will sign it today. Is there anything else I can help you with? No, that's all. Thank you for the information. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. Step 1 is done. Now step 2. I dialed the number of the bank where Elliot and I had a joint account, another legacy from the days when I trusted my son completely. I'd like to close the joint account, I said after the standard identity checks, and transfer the funds to my personal account. Of course, Mr. Huffman. You can do that at any bank branch with your ID. I'll be there today. After that, I called work and said I'd be taking some time off for personal reasons. Gloria, who was already in the archives, asked worriedly, Is something wrong, Warren? You never take time off. I have some important matters to attend to, I replied. I'll tell you later. Okay, she paused. Are you okay? I'll be fine. I tried to smile, though she couldn't see it. I'll see you tomorrow. I walked out of the house and headed to the bank. The day was clear and cold. The streets were still slushy from the melted snow, but the sky was clear, sunny. I walked, breathing deeply of the frosty air, and with each step I felt my resolve strengthen. At the bank, I filled out all the necessary forms, presented my documents, and closed the joint account, transferring all the money to my personal account. The teller, a young woman with a friendly smile, didn't ask too many questions. To her, it was just another routine transaction. Leaving the bank, I checked my email on my phone. The tuition waiver form had already arrived. I could electronically sign it right now, but I decided to go home and do it from my computer so that it would be official and correct. At home, I read the form carefully, signed it, and sent it back to the college. Then sat in my chair and stared out the window for a long time, trying to comprehend what I had just done. I had cut Elliot off from financial aid. For the first time in his entire life, I had never denied him anything that was in my power to give. And now I've done it. Was it the right thing to do? Was it too cruel? Was it out of revenge? I went over these questions over and over again, trying to be honest with myself. No, it wasn't revenge. I didn't want to hurt Elliot or get him in trouble. I just couldn't go on with what was happening between us anymore. This unhealthy dynamic where I give everything and get scorn in return, where my son uses me, lies to me, and laughs at me behind my back. Something had to change. And since I couldn't change Elliot, he's an adult making his own choices, I had to change my behavior. I spent the rest of the day doing chores I'd long put off because of my constant busyness with work and part-time jobs. I washed windows, took apart a closet, fixed a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Normal, routine tasks helped calm my mind and not think about what would happen when Elliot found out about my decision. At 5:30, I left the house and headed to Gloria's. She lived a few blocks away from me, in a small but cozy apartment she shared with her elderly mother. Gloria herself had never married or had children, but she took care of her nephews and was active in the local Latino community. Gloria opened the door without waiting for me to call. Apparently, she'd spotted me from the window. "Warren, come in." She let me into the apartment. I'd just made tea. It smelled like cinnamon and something sweet inside. There was a teapot and a plate of cookies on the living room table. "Is your mom home?" I asked, taking off my coat. "No, she's at her sister's. She won't be back until tomorrow." Gloria nodded at the sofa. "Sit down. Tell me about it." I sat down, accepting the cup of tea she handed me. "I don't know where to begin." "At the beginning," she said simply. And I did. Everything, from beginning to end. About the rich house, about the awkward atmosphere, about the taunts that turned into outright insults, about Elliot's words that still echoed in my head, "You don't even realize how pathetic you are," about how I'd left and how I'd felt walking home alone. Gloria listened in silence, only occasionally shaking her head or sighing sympathetically. When I finished telling her about last night, she asked, "What did you do?" I took a deep breath and told her about my decision: canceling the college payment, closing the joint account. "I don't know if I did the right thing," I said, finishing the story. "Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should have talked to him first." Gloria set the cup on the table and looked at me for a long time with her dark, attentive eyes. "Warren, how many times have you tried to talk to Elliot over the years? How many times have you tried to explain to him how hard this is for you? How many times have you asked him to respect you and your choices?" I didn't say anything. She was right. I tried. Many times, always delicately, always careful not to offend, not to alienate, and always to no avail. "You're a good man, Warren," Gloria continued, "and a good father. You gave everything you could to your son. But, sometimes the best thing a parent can do for their child is to let them face the consequences of their actions." "But what if it destroys our relationship for good?" I asked. "What if he never forgives me for this? Is there a relationship now?" Gloria asked softly. "What you're describing is not a father-son relationship. It's an ATM and customer relationship." Her words hit me like a slap in the face, but there was truth in them. Bitter, unpleasant, but true. "Listen." Gloria leaned toward me. "My father was a very strict man. When I was a teenager, we fought all the time. I thought he was backward, conservative, incomprehensible. I did everything against him. Left the house, didn't listen to his advice. He wouldn't give me money when I demanded it, wouldn't buy me things I wanted, wouldn't let me do things my girlfriends did. I hated him for that." She paused, sipped her tea. "And then I grew up and realized that he always wanted the best for me, that his strictness was an expression of love, that if he had indulged my every whim, I would have grown up spoiled and unfit for life. Now I was grateful for every rejection, every no that made me stronger." I sighed. "But Elliot is in his 20s. He's married. Maybe it's too late for lessons like this." "It's never too late to grow up," Gloria shrugged. "Some people don't grow up until their 40s unless life forces them to. Your son is spoiled, Warren. You admit it yourself. He's used to getting everything he wants without making an effort. He's used to you being the one to roll the dice. Maybe it's time he learned that's not how it works in the real world." And you think canceling his college tuition is the right way to teach him that lesson. I think it's your decision, and you made it not out of anger or revenge, but because you realize that what's happening now isn't helping you or Elliot. You're giving him a chance to be his own man, to take responsibility for what he says and does. It's not a punishment, Warren. It's showing him respect as an adult. I've been thinking about what she said. Maybe she's right. Maybe all these years of trying to protect Elliot from hardship, I was actually preventing him from becoming a real man. Sometimes kids have to lose things to appreciate what they had, Gloria said quietly. Sometimes they need to face hardship to realize the value of support. It's hard, Warren. I can see how much pain you're in, but it may be the only way to save your relationship in the long run. I nodded, feeling the confidence growing inside that my decision was the right one. Thank you, Gloria, for the tea and for the advice. You're welcome, she smiled. You know what? I think this experience will be good not only for Elliot but for you as well. Me? Yes. For too long you've lived only for your son, forgetting about yourself. Maybe it's time to remember that you have your own life, your own interests, your own dreams. I've been thinking, when was the last time I did something solely for myself? When was the last time I let myself dream about something other than Elliot's future? You're right, I said. Maybe it's time for a change. Gloria smiled wider. That's good. Now I think we both need another cup of tea. She got up to fill the kettle, and I stayed seated, looking out the window at the darkening sky and feeling strangely relieved. For the first time in a long time, I'd made a decision, thinking not only of Elliot's good, but of my own. Even though it was hard, even though there were still challenges ahead, I knew it was the right decision. The week after Thanksgiving passed in a strange calm. Elliot didn't call or write not a single text, not a single phone call. I didn't contact him either. I checked my email every morning expecting some kind of reaction from the college to my payment waiver, but there were no messages. I went to work, did my chores, came home, listened to records, and translated documents from Spanish. Life seemed to be back on track, but deep down, I knew it was a temporary lull. Sooner or later, Elliot would be informed that his spring semester tuition was unpaid. Sooner or later, he would discover that he couldn't withdraw money from our joint account, and then there would inevitably be a clash. I wasn't afraid of that. After our conversation with Gloria, I felt more confident in my decision, but there was still anxiety inside, not for myself, but for Elliot. How would he react? What would he do? Would he be able to overcome this ordeal and become stronger? On Wednesday, exactly 1 week after Thanksgiving, I was working in the archives, sorting through documents for a new exhibit on the history of industry in Ainsworth. There was silence, broken only by the rustling of papers and the quiet hum of the computer on Gloria's desk. It was lunchtime, but we both stayed in the office. Me because I wanted to finish the paperwork, Gloria because she was waiting for an important call from her sister. Suddenly, the archive's door swung open with such force that it hit the wall. Elliot stood on the threshold, his face contorted with rage. "You!" He pointed a finger at me, stepping forward. "What have you done?" I slowly straightened up, looking at my son. He looked unkempt, wrinkled clothes, disheveled hair, red eyes, as if he'd been up all night. "Hello, Elliot," I said calmly. "Don't you dare say hello to me," he almost shouted. "You canceled my college tuition. You closed our joint account. Why the hell did you do that?" Gloria stood up from her desk, clearly disturbed by the situation. "Maybe I should leave you two alone." "No, Gloria," I shook my head. "Stay, please. I have nothing to hide from my colleagues." Elliot made a sound like a growl. "Of course you have nothing to hide. You're proud of ruining my life, aren't you? You like controlling me, telling me what to do." "I'm not trying to control you, Elliot," I said softly but firmly. "I've just decided that I'm not going to pay your tuition anymore." "Why?" He took another step toward me, his face contorted with anger. Because you took offense to our jokes. Really? You're ruining my future because you can't take a harmless joke. What happened at dinner wasn't a harmless joke. I met his gaze squarely. You and Veronica openly mocked me. My job, my hobbies, my lifestyle. You called me pathetic. And now you're surprised I don't want to keep paying your tuition. Tuition that I've spent almost all of my savings and income on. Is that what this is about? Elliot grinned bitterly. You're just a greedy old man. You're greedy for money. I don't feel sorry for the money. I shook my head. I'm sorry that my son has grown up to be a man who thinks it's okay to use his father as an ATM machine and then mock him behind his back. I wasn't using you, Elliot exclaimed. I was just taking what I was entitled to. You're my father. You're supposed to provide for me. You're a grown man, Elliot, I sighed. You're 20 years old. You're married. You have your own life. I don't have to provide for you. So you're just leaving me? His voice broke. Because of one bad dinner, you're undoing everything we had? No, I shook my head. I'm not ending our relationship. I just won't pay your tuition or give you any more money. That doesn't mean I don't want to be your father. We can still see each other, talk, spend time together. Without the money? Elliot laughed, but it was a bitter, angry laugh. What am I supposed to talk to you about? About your dusty papers? About your ancient records? About how wonderful it is to be a loser who, at 50, still works as a clerk? His words were meant to wound, and they accomplished their purpose. But this time, I didn't allow myself to show the pain. If that's all you see in me, then maybe we really have nothing to talk about, I said quietly. Exactly. Elliot pounded his fist on the table. We have nothing in common. I don't want to be like you. I don't want to be stuck in this hole, this miserable job, this empty life. I'm not forcing you to be like me, I shook my head. I've never forced you. I've always supported your hobbies, your music, your desire for a better life. Supported, he laughed again, with your pittance. You have no idea how much the life I'm striving for is really worth. You think paying for college is all it takes? What about the connections you need to get a decent job? What about the internships at prestigious companies that only take referrals? What about all of that? Those are all things you have to earn on your own, I said, with your own labor, your own effort, your own talent, not your father's money. Elliot slammed his fist on the table with such force that the papers bounced. You're ruining my life. Do you realize that? I've already gotten a call from the college. If I don't pay for the spring semester by the end of December, I'll be expelled. Me, the best student in the class. All because of you and your petty grudge. It's not a grudge, Elliot, I still said calmly. It's a decision. I've decided that I will no longer fund a man who disrespects me and my efforts. Fuck you! Elliot grabbed the first thing he could get his hands on, an old framed photograph, and threw it on the floor. The glass shattered. You think I can't do this without you? You think I'll be lost without your money? I'll find a way. I've got friends, I've got talent, You have a chance to prove to yourself and to me what you're really capable of, I interrupted him. Without my help, without my money, show me that you can really make it on your own. Don't you dare lecture me. Elliot took a step toward me, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit me, but he stopped, breathing hard. You're not my father anymore. Do you hear me? You're nothing to me. You're nothing. I'll always be your father, Elliot, I said quietly. No matter what you say, no matter what you do, and I'll always love you. Shove your love up your ass, he shouted. I don't need that kind of love. I don't need that kind of father. He turned around and headed for the door, but stopped on the threshold and turned around. You'll regret this, he said with cold fury. When I am famous, when I have succeeded without your help, you will come crawling to me on your knees, begging for forgiveness. But I won't. I never will. With those words, he walked out, slamming the door so hard that another picture frame fell from the shelf. There was silence in the room. I stood looking at the closed door, feeling a strange mixture of pain and relief. Pain from the fact that my son hated me so much. Relief that I had finally told him the truth and stayed true to my decision. Gloria came over to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I did what I had to do." She nodded. It was the right thing to do. Hard, but right. I bent down and picked up a broken frame from the floor. It was a picture of our archives department taken a few years ago. Me, Gloria, and two other co-workers who had already quit. The glass had shattered, but the photo itself was intact. "We'll order a new frame," Gloria said. "It's a good thing it's not a family heirloom." "Yeah," I smiled weakly. "Good." We went back to work, but my thoughts were far away. I thought about what Elliot had said, about his threats and promises. Would he really become successful without my help? I hope so. No matter what, I truly wanted my son to succeed. The next day, while I was alone in the archives, Gloria had left for lunch, the phone rang. I picked up the receiver. "Ainsworth City Archives, how may I help you?" "Mr. Huffman." "Warren Huffman?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, that's me." "Hello, Mr. Huffman. My name is Morris Klein, and I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Musical Arts at Ramsey College." I squeezed the receiver a little harder. "Hello, Professor Klein. I'm calling about your son, Elliot." The dean's voice sounded concerned. "He came to me today and told me he was dropping out. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was adamant." I took a deep breath. "I understand. But Elliot is an adult, and it's his decision." "Of course," Professor Klein agreed. "But, you see, Elliot is one of our most talented students, especially in music. He has a great future. I think it's a huge mistake to interrupt his education midway through." "I agree with you," I said. "But it's Elliot's decision, not mine. He said he was having financial difficulties," the dean continued, "that he couldn't pay for the next semester. I thought maybe you didn't know about it. Maybe there's some misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding, Professor Klein," I spoke firmly. "I have indeed decided to stop paying Elliot's tuition. My son and I have had a disagreement." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I understand," the dean finally said. "But maybe you could reconsider. For Elliot, this could be the question of his entire future career." "I'm sorry, but my decision is final," I said. "Elliot is a talented young man. If he really wants to continue his education, he will find a way to do it. There are scholarships, there are student loans, there are jobs." "Yes, of course," the dean sighed. "It's just a shame to lose a student like that." "I'm sorry too," I said sincerely. "But maybe this ordeal will make him stronger in the long run." "Maybe," the dean didn't sound convinced. "Well, thank you for the conversation, Mr. Huffman. Have a good day." "Good day, Professor." I hung up the phone and sat staring into space for a long time. So Elliot dropped out of college. It was a decisive move, but I wasn't sure it was the right one. However, it was his decision, his choice. I had to respect that even if I didn't agree. A few days later, I ran into Mrs. Parker, our neighbor, as I was leaving the house for work. She was a notorious gossip, but sometimes you could learn useful information from her. "Warren, dear," she stopped me with a hand on the sleeve of my coat. "I hear your son and his wife have moved out of that expensive house in the Highlands. Is that true?" I was surprised. I didn't know anything about it. "I'm not sure, Mrs. Parker," I answered cautiously. "Elliot and I haven't talked to each other much lately." "Oh," she looked disappointed but quickly continued. "Well, my niece works at the real estate agency that rented this house to them. She said they moved out in a hurry without even taking their deposit, and there was something about unpaid rent." I frowned. This wasn't like Elliot. Despite all his faults, he had always been responsible in financial matters. "Maybe it's some kind of misunderstanding," I said, trying to end the conversation. "Maybe," Mrs. Parker nodded. "But Jenny, she works at the bank," Said she saw them selling things in that thrift store on Maple Street. Beautiful things, crystal glasses, some paintings. I felt a pang of anxiety. Was the situation really that serious? Are Elliot and Veronica really selling things off to make ends meet? Thank you for the information, Mrs. Parker. I nodded politely. I have to go. I'm late for work. Of course, dear. She patted my arm. If you find out anything about them, let me know. I'm so worried about your family. I doubted the sincerity of her concern, but I nodded and hurried away. I couldn't concentrate at work. My thoughts kept coming back to Elliot. Where is he now? What is he doing? Is he okay? I wanted to call him, but I knew he wouldn't answer. He must have deleted my number from his contacts after the last time I saw him. On my way home that evening, I decided to stop by the Blue Note, a small jazz club I sometimes frequented. The owner, Joe Simmons, was an old acquaintance of mine. We weren't close friends, but we always got along well. The club was almost empty. It was a weekday, and the main customers came in closer to the weekend. Joe was standing behind the bar, rubbing glasses. "Warren?" He smiled when he saw me. "Haven't been in for a while. How's it going?" "All right, Joe." I sat down on a bar stool. "A beer, please." He poured me a beer and set the glass in front of me. "I hear you're having difficulties with your son." I looked at him in surprise. "How'd you know that?" "Small town, Warren," he shrugged. "Everybody knows everything. Besides, he came here last week, asked for a job. I almost choked on my beer." "Elliot asked you for a job?" "Yeah," Joe nodded. "Said he needed the money and was willing to play every night if he had to. I took him in for a tryout on Friday. You know, he's pretty damn good. The crowd loved it." "And you took him?" I asked. "For the weekend," Joe nodded. "Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We pay as agreed, plus tips from visitors. It's not great, but it's a good start." I sipped my beer, mulling over this information. Elliot had always been a talented musician, but I'd never thought he'd make a living at it. He was always aiming for a more prestigious career. "But he said it was only temporary," Joe continued, "that he's saving up to tour the country. He wants to try different cities, different clubs. Ambitious guy." "Yeah, it's in his nature," I nodded. "And his wife? Is she with him?" Joe grimaced. "She came in on Friday, sat there in the corner looking as if the place wasn't worthy of her presence. Saturday and Sunday she was gone. Elliot said she'd gone to her parents' house for a while." "For a while?" "That's what he said," Joe shrugged. "But, you know, I've seen a lot of stories like that. A girl marries a promising guy thinking he's going to be rich and famous right away. And when it turns out that the road to success is long and hard, many don't make it." I sighed. It sounded plausible. Veronica never gave the impression of a girl who was ready for hardship and hardship. "When is he going to perform again?" I asked. "This Friday," Joe answered. "But I wouldn't advise you to come if you're in a quarrel. He's very angry with you, Warren." "I know," I nodded. "But maybe I'll drop in after all, just to see him from a distance to make sure he's okay." Joe looked at me sympathetically. "You're a good father, Warren. Whatever happened between you two?" "Thanks." I finished my beer and stood up. "How much do I owe you?" "On the house," Joe said with a wave of his hand. "Come back Friday. I'll put you in the back corner where it's dark. He won't see you." I thanked him and left the club. The night was cold but starry. I walked home slowly, thinking about what I had learned. Elliot dropped out of college, moved out of his expensive house, sold his stuff, got a job playing at a club, and plans to travel the country. Veronica apparently couldn't stand the changes in their lives and moved back in with her parents, temporarily or permanently, unknown. All of this was a consequence of my decision not to pay his tuition. I felt a pang of guilt, but then I reminded myself, Elliot is a grown man. He's making his own decisions about his life. And maybe those decisions will ultimately lead him to a better future than the one he had planned before. Maybe through hardship, he will find his true path. Friday night, I sat in a dark corner of Blue Note and watched my son walk onto the small stage with guitar in hand. He looked different, longer hair, simpler clothes, but there was something new in his posture, in the way he held the instrument, some kind of confidence I hadn't noticed before. When he started playing, the club went quiet. His music was beautiful, technically flawless, but more importantly, full of emotions he had previously hidden. Pain, anger, frustration. It was all in his playing, but there was something else too. Hope, determination, strength. I sat in my dark corner, listening to my son's music and thinking that perhaps my decision, as difficult as it was, had opened the door to a new life for him. A life in which he would rely on himself, not me. A life in which he could find his own path, his own happiness. A month later, Elliot left Ainsworth. Joe told me he headed west, toward Chicago, where he had an arrangement to play at several clubs. Veronica didn't go with him. Rumor had it she had gone back to her parents in Connecticut and filed divorce papers. I didn't know if I would ever see my son again. I didn't know if he would forgive me for what I had done. But I did know one thing. I loved him and wished him nothing but the best, even if our paths parted. It had been 2 years since Elliot and I had broken up. 2 years without a single call, text, or word from my son. 2 years during which my life had followed a familiar pattern work in the archives, evenings with records, occasional translations from Spanish, though I took far fewer of them now than I had before. Without having to pay for Elliot's tuition, my budget was freer, and I could afford a little more vacation time. Occasionally I heard about my son through third hands. Joe from Blue Note would sometimes get news from other music club owners. Elliot was really traveling around the country, performing here and there. Some saw him in Chicago, some in New Orleans, some in Los Angeles. Rumor has it that he formed a small band and started playing his own compositions. They said he was well received by the public. I never heard from Veronica again after she moved back in with her parents. Whether they were officially divorced, I didn't know. It didn't matter much. Their marriage was clearly a mistake, a hasty decision by 2 young people who didn't know each other well and had an even worse understanding of family life. Not much changed in my own life. I was still working in the city archives, doing my dusty paperwork, as Elliot had once put it. Gloria remained my closest friend. We often had tea after work, discussing news, books, movies. Sometimes she tried to introduce me to some friend or relative of hers, but I politely declined. It wasn't that I was against a new relationship. I just didn't feel the need for it. I continued to collect vinyl records. Now that I had more spare money, I could afford the rarer and more expensive copies. Once I even went to an auction in Portland where I bought a first edition of a Miles Davis album I had long wanted. Sometimes I thought about how my life would have turned out if I had continued to support Elliot financially. I would have continued to work nights, to save money on everything, to deny myself small pleasures like a new record or a trip to Portland. I would continue to receive scorn and ridicule in return. Most likely, our relationship would have broken down anyway, just later and more painfully. No, I didn't regret the decision. I did what I had to do. And from the rumors I'd heard, Elliot wasn't lost without my support. He'd found his way, though not the way we'd once planned with Margaret. One spring day, when the sun was really warming up and the first leaves were on the trees, I came home from work and found an unaddressed envelope in the mailbox. The handwriting on the envelope looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't tell for sure whose it was. The postmark was from Oregon, a town called Astoria about which I knew almost nothing. I went into the house, hung up my coat, turned on the light in the living room and sat in the chair, still holding the envelope in my hands. For some reason, I was afraid to open it. Some sixth sense told me that the contents of that envelope could change my life, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that change. Finally, I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. Inside was a plain white piece of paper, folded in half. I unfolded it and saw the familiar handwriting, a little more angular than I remembered, but undeniably Elliot's. "Dad," the letter began, "I don't know if you still live at the same address, or if you'll get this letter. I don't even know if you'll want to read it when you see who it's from, but I must try. It's been 2 years since I left Ainsworth. 2 years in which I've realized a lot about myself, about life, and about you. I won't tell you my whole story. It would be enough for a whole book, and I'm not sure it would be interesting. I will only say that I traveled a lot, played in different clubs, met different people. Some of them became friends, some of them became enemies. Most of them just passed me by. Veronica and I divorced almost immediately after I left Ainsworth. She wasn't ready for the life I'd chosen, nor, frankly, was I ready for the life she had chosen. We were too different and married too soon before we really got to know each other. Now I live in Astoria, a small town on the Oregon coast. I play at a local club 5 nights a week. I have my own little apartment overlooking the ocean. I have a bike. I have a guitar. Nothing fancy, but it's enough for me. I've learned a lot in these last 2 years, Dad. I've learned that money doesn't bring happiness unless you've earned it yourself. I've learned that respect can't be bought. It can only be earned. I realize that real friends are those who stay with you when you have nothing, not those who admire your wealth or status. And most importantly, I realized how much you've done for me, how much sacrifice you made so that I could go to a good college, so that I could have everything I needed. I realized what an ungrateful pig I was when I ridiculed you, your work, your hobbies, when I embarrassed you in front of Veronica and your friends. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Dad. I know I've said and done too many terrible things. I'm not going back to Ainsworth, and I don't expect you to accept me as a son again. I just wanted you to know that I've realized my mistakes, and I'm sorry for them. And I wanted to say thank you for everything you've done for me and for the lesson you taught me when you refused to continue paying my tuition. It was a hard lesson, but a necessary one. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're happy. Elliot. I reread the letter twice, then folded it and put it on the table next to my chair. I stood up, walked over to the shelf of records, and looked through them for a long time until I found the one I was looking for. An old jazz album that we used to listen to a lot with Elliot when he was little. He couldn't read back then, but he knew what the cover of that album looked like and always asked me to put it on. I took the record out of the envelope, placed it carefully on the turntable, and lowered the needle. The room was filled with the warm, familiar sounds of the saxophone. I returned to my chair, picked up the letter again, and reread it. 2 years. 2 years it took my son to begin to understand life and his place in it. 2 years to learn the value of work, of respect, of real relationships. 2 years to grow up. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him completely. The wounds caused by his words and actions were too deep to heal so quickly, but something inside me softened. For the first time in a long time, I felt that Elliot was really starting to grow up, to become a man instead of a spoiled brat. I stared at the folded letter in my hands and thought, what next? Should I answer him, go to Astoria, or just accept his apology and move on with my life? I didn't have an answer to those questions. Not yet. Maybe he would come tomorrow, or in a week, or a month, or maybe never. I put the letter on the table and leaned back in my chair, covering my eyes and listening to music. The same music we had once listened to with little Elliot sitting in this very room. He asked me 1,000 questions about jazz, about musicians, about instruments, and I answered, delighted by his curiosity, his interest, his enthusiasm. Maybe, somewhere deep inside, that little boy still existed. Maybe he had just gotten lost for a while and now he was finally starting to find his way back. Not to me, to himself, to his true self. And maybe one day, our paths will cross again. Not as the path of a father controlling his son's life and a son using his father, but as the path of two grown men who respect each other and can build a relationship as equals. The record ended, but I didn't get up to flip it over or put a new one on. I sat in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window, coloring the room with warm, golden tones. It was spring outside the window, a time of renewal, a time of new beginnings, a time when even the oldest and deepest of wounds begin to heal, and new growth sprouts from the seemingly dead earth. I didn't know what the future would bring for me and Elliot. I didn't know if I would answer his letter, and if so, what I would write. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we could have a future. Not the kind I had once dreamed of, but perhaps even better in some ways. A future based on mutual respect and understanding, not financial dependence and a false sense of duty. I picked up the letter again, ran my fingers across the paper, over the words written in my son's hand, and smiled quietly. No matter what happened next, I knew one thing. Elliot was finally starting to become the man I'd always wanted him to be. And for that, I was grateful. It was another 6 months after I received the letter from Elliot. I often reread it, sitting in my chair in the evenings, listening to old records. Sometimes I started to write a reply, but I couldn't find the right words. How could I express everything I felt? The pain of his betrayal, the pride that he had found his way, the hope that we could rebuild our relationship. In the end, I never sent a single letter, but I often thought about my son, imagined his life in a small Oregon coastal town. One autumn day, when the leaves had already turned bright colors and the air was cool and crisp, I returned from work and found a familiar figure on my front porch. My heart skipped a beat. It was Elliot. He was sitting on the steps with his tattered backpack and guitar case beside him. When he saw me, he rose slowly. I froze, looking him over. Elliot had changed inside and out. His hair had grown longer, his face had a neat beard, his shoulders were broader, and his eyes had the confidence of a mature man. But most importantly, the arrogance and haughtiness that had characterized him before had disappeared. Now before me stood a grown-up man who had gone through difficulties and learned to appreciate simple things. "Hello, Dad," he said quietly, smiling uncertainly. "Hello, Elliot," I tried to speak calmly, but my voice gave away my excitement. "How long have you been sitting here?" "About an hour," he shrugged. I didn't want to bother the neighbors with questions, so I just waited. "You could have called," I said, pulling out my keys. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he admitted. "After everything I've said to you, I'd understand if you'd just slammed the door in my face." I opened the door and gestured for him to come in. "I'm not that kind of man, Elliot, and you know it." He picked up his things and walked into the house. I noticed his gaze sliding around the living room, the shelves of records, the old armchair I used to sit in the evenings. It was the same as it had been 2.5 years ago when he'd left. "Make yourself comfortable," I said. "Are you hungry?" "A little," he admitted. "I've been traveling most of the day. I'll cook something." I headed for the kitchen, trying to hide my excitement. "Do you still like spaghetti with tomato sauce?" "Yes," he smiled, and in that smile I saw for a moment the little boy I once knew. Some things don't change. While I cooked, Elliot sat at the kitchen table. He talked about his life in Astoria, the club where he played, the people he met, how he'd first lived in a van, then rented a corner from a local fisherman, how he'd finally saved up for a small apartment overlooking the ocean. "You know what the funny thing is, Dad?" he said when I put a plate of spaghetti in front of him. "I realized that I like this life. Simple, no bullshit, no constant chasing of status. Just doing what you love and being honest with yourself and others." I sat across from him with my own plate. "So what happened to that ambitious guy who dreamed of a great career and wealth?" Elliot twirled his fork thoughtfully in his spaghetti. "He grew up," he answered simply. "Realized that money and status were worthless if you didn't earn them yourself, and that real respect can't be bought, only earned." We ate in silence for a while, and then Elliot looked up at me. I understood why you refused to pay for college, he said. It was the only way to make me grow up, and I'm grateful for that, even though I hated it with all my soul. I never meant to hurt you, I said. I just realized that I was only making things worse by keeping you, for you and for our relationship. You were right, he nodded. You know, those first few months were hell. I was angry at you, blaming you for all my problems. But then I started to realize that it was my own fault for what happened. I used you, lied to you, made fun of you behind your back. What kind of son does that to his father? You were young, I shrugged. Everyone makes mistakes when they're young. That's no excuse, Elliot shook his head. I was a selfish asshole, to put it bluntly. And it wasn't because I was young, it was because I'd never faced real adversity. You were always protecting me, always giving me everything you could. And I took it for granted without even thinking about the sacrifices you made. I looked at my son and saw real remorse in his eyes. It wasn't empty words or an attempt at manipulation. He had truly realized his mistakes and was truly sorry for them. What happened to Veronica? I asked, changing the subject. Elliot's face darkened. She moved back in with her parents 2 weeks after we moved out of that house in the Highlands. Said she didn't sign up for a life of poverty, that she thought I'd be a successful musician, not a tramp playing in cheap bars. And you got divorced? Yeah, almost immediately, he shrugged. It was for the best. We were too different and married too soon. I thought I loved her, but really I was just fascinated by her beauty and status. And I think she saw me as a promising college kid who would one day be rich and successful. When it turned out that wasn't the case, her love quickly evaporated. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I'm not, Elliot smiled weakly. It was another lesson I needed to learn, about real feelings and fake ones, about what really matters in a relationship. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I offered Elliot a whiskey, and he accepted. We sat in the armchairs sipping our drink and continued our conversation. Elliot told me about his plans. He was going on a little tour of the Midwest. He had arrangements with several clubs where he would be playing in the coming months. I even have a manager, he said proudly. Amateur, of course, but he believes in my music and helps organize gigs. Do you write your own songs? I asked. Yes, for over a year now, he nodded. Would you like to hear some? I agreed with a smile, and Elliot took his guitar out of its case. He started playing, and I was amazed at how his music had changed. He used to play technically flawless but mechanical. Now his playing had soul, emotion, a depth that had been missing before. He sang some of his songs, about wanderings, about losses, about searching for himself. They weren't played up or pretentious. They were honest, heartfelt stories of a man who went through hardship and found his own voice. When he finished playing, I sat in silence for a few seconds, impressed by what I had heard. That's beautiful, Elliot, I said at last. You've become a real musician. Thanks, Dad. His eyes shone with gratitude. It means a lot to me, especially to hear you say that. We talked late into the night. Elliot talked about his travels, the people he met, the lessons he learned. I talked about my life in Ainsworth, about working in the archives, about the new records I'd acquired. It was strange and amazing how easy it was for us to communicate. It was as if the wall that had always stood between us, the wall of misunderstandings, unspoken grievances, different expectations, had disappeared. Now we were talking like two adults, respecting each other and genuinely interested in each other's lives. When we finally decided it was time for bed, I showed Elliot his old room. It was almost exactly the same as it had been. I hadn't changed a thing since he'd left. Thanks, Dad, Elliot said, standing in the doorway. Not just for the room, for everything, for not slamming the door in my face, for listening, for giving me a chance to make things right. You're my son, Elliot, I said simply. No matter what happens, you'll always be my son. He suddenly stepped forward and hugged me tightly in a way he hadn't hugged me in years. I hugged him back, feeling warm tears come to my eyes. At breakfast that morning, Elliot said he had to go to a club in a neighboring state where he was scheduled to perform tonight. "I'll be back, Dad," he promised, standing at the front door with his backpack and guitar. "I'll come back more often now, if that's okay with you." "I'll be glad to," I replied, believing his words for the first time in a long time. We hugged goodbye, and Elliot walked toward the waiting cab. He turned around and waved at me. I waved back, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and joy. Back in the house, I went to the shelf of records and pulled out the one we used to listen to together when Elliot was a kid. I put it on the turntable, put the needle down, and sat back in the chair with my eyes closed. Music filled the room, and with it came memories of a little boy with wide-open eyes who asked 1,000 questions about jazz, about musicians, about instruments, of the teenager who practiced guitar for hours in his room, about the young man who received his acceptance letter to Ramsey College and jumped for joy, and now about a grown man who found his path, his voice, his music, who made mistakes, admitted them, and found the strength to ask for forgiveness. I didn't know what the future would bring. I didn't know how strong our new understanding would be. I didn't know if Elliot would become a famous musician or remain a talented performer in small clubs. But I did know one thing. My son had finally grown up. Not in age or status, but truly, internally. He had learned to be responsible for his actions, to appreciate what he had, to respect others and himself. And that was more important than anything else. I sat in my chair, listening to music and thinking about how sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones, and that true parental love isn't always about indulging and protecting. Sometimes it means allowing your child to face challenges so that they can grow into a strong and independent person. That's exactly what I did 2.5 years ago. And now I have seen the result. Not perfect, not what I once dreamed of, but beautiful in its own way. My son had become a man I could be proud of, and more importantly, a man who could be proud of himself.